Okay, so now that you know what an object literal is, I just want to get into a couple other things, including using the spread operator with objects and some of the methods that we can use. So, and before we do that, I just want to show you there is another way that we can create objects. So let's say we want to create a to-do object. Now we could do this, which just creates an empty object, and then we could add properties either in here, or we could do like to-do dot, let's say ID equals 1. Right, and then if we log that out, let's just create our x variable. And then if we go ahead and set x equals to do, and we console log x, we get an object with an ID of 1. Now another way to do this is an object literal, but we could also use the object constructor, just like we did with arrays. So we could say new object like that. If I save, we're going to get the same thing. So this line, this is the same as just setting it to a literal and just an empty set of curly braces. And I could continue to add on to this, like if I say to do dot name, and we'll set that to, I don't know, buy milk, and maybe to do completed, not component, completed, and set that to false. Okay, if we save that, we take a look, we're just going to have our properties on that to-do object. Now later on I'm going to show you how we can actually create our own constructors for certain objects, and we could do stuff like this, like to-do 1 and then set it to a new to-do. So you can create a custom constructor for a custom to-do object, but we'll get into that later on. Now I want to show you how to use the spread operator. Well, actually before that, let's just go over nesting real quick. I know we did in the last video, but just to kind of remind you, we could set person, and then we could have address, and then let's say in address we have coordinates, and maybe have a latitude value of 42 dot something, and then and then a longitude value of negative 71 dot something. And then if we wanted to access the, let's say, latitude, we could do that by setting x to person, then we want to go into address, then we want to go into chords, and then we want the lat value. All right, so that's nesting. Now as far as the spread operator goes, it works very similarly to using it with arrays. So what I'll do here is just create two very simple objects. Doesn't really matter what you have for the properties here, but I'll just do A1, B2, and then I'm going to create another object 2 and set this, for our keys we'll do C, let's say C3, and then D4. Okay, now if I create, let's say, object 3, I could nest those in here, right? So if I just pass in object 1 and then object 2, and then let's just set x to, just so we can see it, we'll set x to object 3. I save that. Now what we have is an object that has two objects inside. Okay, so the first one is object 1, second one object 2. Now if I want to just take, and you'll find yourself doing this quite a bit in JavaScript, if you want to just take the properties of object 1 and object 2 and put them in, basically combine them into this single object 3, then you can just use the spread operator. So we'll just add the 3 dots in front of each one, and now when I log out object 3, we get all of these properties within both objects all on the top level of object 3, because we took them and spread them across. All right, now if I were to take the spread operator off object 2 and save, you'll see object 1 values are on the top level spread across, but object 2 is in there as a nested object. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Now there's a few methods on the object that we can use, and one of them is called assign. And that does the same thing as the spread operator. In fact, the spread operator was introduced in ES 2015. Before that, you had to use object assign. So let's just say we want to create another object called object 4, and we're going to set that to capital O object, just like on the array object. There's methods, there is here as well. And the one we want to look at right now is called assign. So as the first argument we pass in is just going to be a set of empty curly braces. That basically just gives us an empty object. If I were to log obj4, you'll see it's just an empty object. Now if I want to add the properties from object 1, I would pass object 1 in as the second argument, and if I save, now you'll see those are added to this obj4. If I want to take the properties of object 2, I would just add that as another argument, save, and now those get added. Okay, so whatever I pass in here, any objects I pass in here, the properties of those are going to get assigned to this empty object. Okay, so both of these lines do the same exact thing. And it's up to you on what you want to use. The spread operator to me is easier and more concise and just more modern, but if you want, you can of course use this. Okay, so a lot of times we're going to be dealing with arrays of objects. Any resources in the database, like, or from an API, like to-dos or users or blog posts, you're usually going to deal with arrays of objects for those resources. So let's say, what should we do here? Let's say we want to do an array called to-dos, right? So we'll set that to an array, and then in that array we'll have our first to-do, so it's going to be an object. We'll say ID1, and then name, we'll say, I don't know, buy milk again. Okay, and then I'm going to put a comma after that and copy it down a couple times. And the second object is going to have an ID of 2. This will have an ID of 3. And here we'll say, I don't know, pick up kids from school. And then we'll have take out trash. Okay, so now we have an array, an array of objects. So I'm going to set this X here to to-dos. If I do that, we're going to see our array of objects. Now, if I want to access a specific object, just like we do with any array, we use our bracket syntax. Say we want to get the first one, we use our 0 index. That gives us that object. Now, if I want to access a specific property like name, I simply do .name. All right, so those are arrays of objects. Now, later on, we're going to get into iteration and looping and being able to go through each object and do something to it or just display it. But we're gonna do that a little bit later. Now, I want to show you a few other methods we have available on object. So if you want to get all of the keys in an object and put those into an array, we can use object keys. So let's say x equals object.keys. And what do I want to use this on? Let's do the to-do object we created up here. So say object.keys, and we'll pass in the to-do object. And then we want to log x, and you'll see now we have an array that has the value of ID, name, and completed. Okay, so it just took the keys from this to-do object and put them into an array. Now, there's going to be times where you're going to want to get the length of an object, meaning how many properties does it have in it. And we can't use length on that. Like if I try to do x equals, and let's take our to-do object and do length. If I do that, it's going to say undefined. So the way that we can get it is by first getting the keys and then getting the length of that. So if I just take this and put that on there, that's going to give me an array, right? And we can use length on an array. So we'll simply do length, and if I save, we get 3. Okay, so up here you can see we have 3. And I could have created an object literal as well. So the next thing is if you want to get an array with all the values, just the values, we can use object.values just like we can use object.keys. So let's say object.values, and we'll pass in to do, save that, and now we just have an array of the values. Now if you want to get an array of the key value pairs, you can do that with entries. So let's say x equals object.entries, and then pass in our object, save that, and now we have an array with arrays that have the key value pairs. And then the last one I'm going to show you is hasOwnProperty, which will give you a Boolean indicating if the object has a specific property. So let's say x equals, and then we actually call this on the actual object. So for instance, to do. And then we can say hasOwnProperty, and let's pass in name. If I save that, we get true because it does have a name property, right? If we put in, I don't know, age, and I save that, then we get false because that to-do object does not have a property of age. So that's it. I just wanted you guys to get familiar with the spread operator and some of these really helpful methods that you have on your object. So in the next video, we're going to look at something called destructuring and also naming, because you do have a lot of properties inside of an object, and sometimes you might not want to do this because it's pretty long. I'm going to show you how you can destructure so that you don't have to do as many, as much as this dot notation. So we'll get into that in the next video.